Ladies and gentlemen, now proceed with the events of the day. We start with an opening presentation on the basic of ham radio and its various facets. The talk will be delivered by Jaideep Chanda, VU2YYE, better known as Jai. His passion for amateur radio, basically his passion for radio and technology applications, has been a constant part of his professional and personal life. As the president founder of the BETAAR Ham Club, Secunderabad near Hyderabad, he has been instrumental in training over 100 hams in Hyderabad. So without any further delay, I would like to call on stage Jaideep Chanda sir.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me at the end, please?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Jaideep Chanda, VU2YYE, and I have structured this presentation as an initial presentation to set the stage for the rest of the activities and the rest of the lectures. I call it hamplified, which basically means ham radio simplified. You can also consider it as ham radio amplified if you want to. Next please. It's a chat for all the aspirants who are in the audience, get to get their tickets, their licenses, all the novices like me. I've also been teaching and I'm also a ham parent. My son is also a ham. So the last three roles, parent, teacher and novice, is what I hold currently. And I used to be an SWL, and I, of course, at one point in time was an aspirant. Next please. So this is what people think at one end of the spectrum. What is a ham operator? And at the other end of the spectrum, next please, we consider ourselves 0.2% of the world's population who are hams. Next. So why am I qualified to speak on this? Why me? And the reasons are, next. Firstly, I am a completely non-technical person, and this is a myth that I want to break, that to be a good ham, you have to be very, very technically sound. I am a commerce graduate, I haven't done anything in electronics, but ham is not about being a technical person. Next. I have a completely middle class background and a mindset, and budgets are very important to me. And that's one of the reasons I feel that I'm very qualified to speak on this, because I have been doing ham on a very, very nominal budget for the last couple of years. Next please. Yeah, so I have romanced the radio, as I call it, since childhood. Those days we didn't have much entertainment, and my favorite radio used to be a Philips brand radio, and it used to be called the Jawan model. Jawan 678 or something like that. It was very highly sought after, and it would catch, we believe, virtually anything and everything anywhere in the world. Next. So I've been involved in training of hams, as I just mentioned. Next please. I established a ham club. This is called the BETAAR Ham Club. BETAAR stands for Bot Lab Experimental Association for Amateur Radio. This is in Secunderabad. It was a huge learning experience, and which I felt I must share with all of us, so that we can have more ham clubs. I feel India as a country and ham as a hobby does not have enough ham clubs, especially in the east and in the northeast, and of course across the border, also in Bangladesh. There were a lot of things which I learned in the process of becoming a ham and in the process of setting up this ham club, and I felt, had I known those things earlier, I could have done a better job. So this is for that purpose. Next. I do not have all the answers, but I know the people who have most of the answers. Next. Next. Yeah. A quick word about where we come into play. So there's something called with electromagnetic radiation, we have a spectrum, we have radio waves, and at the end of it, we have what we call the amateur radio frequency spectrum. This amateur radio frequency spectrum is our playground. This is where we have all the fun. This is where we do all the activity. Next please. So roughly, the electromagnetic spectrum has these 7 categories which are written in blue. Basically radio waves, microwaves, infrared waves, visible, ultraviolet, X-ray and gamma. And our playground extends from between the radio waves to somewhere in the microwaves. There are certain frequencies which are allotted to us, and there's a legal sanctity of what we are doing. Next, please. So there are 4 organizations with which ham radio is essentially involved. At the global level, we have the International Telecom Union, which is a UN body which looks after information, communication and technology. And for the purpose of ham radio, we have what is called the the International Amateur Radio Union, which is like the Olympic Federation for ham. In India, we have the Wireless and Planning Coordination Committee, and we have members from there sitting with us in the audience, and they'll be speaking to us subsequently in the day. They interact with the ITU, and at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the Amateur Radio Society of India, which is our mother federation. It is like the BCCI to us, if I can draw a correlation. So, if you see the color code, the orange, the WPC interacts mostly with the ITU, a little bit with the IARU, and the ARSI interacts mostly with the IARU, but also to some extent with the WPC, but not with the ITU. The authority to interact with the ITU rests with the Government of India. So that's how the kind of structuring it is. It is the IARU, we come under Region 3, which gives us the frequencies, and it is implemented by the WPC. Finally, the authority for us is the WPC. Next please. Now, this is a very common question, and I have struggled a lot to find a suitable answer for this question. What is ham? Where is Sanat? Sanat is there. Sanat, this will answer some of your questions. Okay. Next. So, now we describe ham radio as a scientific hobby primarily. That's the first thing we say. We don't jump into saying it's going to save the rest of the world. We don't say anything. It's essentially and primarily a scientific hobby in which, next, the end goal is communication between 2 stations, between 2 entities. This communication can take place in a number of forms. We'll come to that later. Next, because it is an alternate means, because the end goal is communication, therefore where you have a number of means of communication and in the eventuality that those means fail, ham radio becomes an alternate means for communication. Right? Next. Now there are some places in India which don't have internet, which don't have any form of communication. And for those places, ham radio therefore becomes a survival tool. Next please. That is why you will see when all else fails, amateur radio. However, with the improvement of communication technology globally, more importantly, with the spread of satellite communication, the situation is reducing by the day where we have to resort to ham radio. And therefore, ham radio has reinvented itself as a scientific hobby firstly, and thereafter secondly as a means for alternate communication. Next please. Now, ham radio is the original social media. This was the original social media, and all this SMS language and all that. We have a formal set of SMS languages, we call it Q codes, and we have QSOs and QSL and QTH and all sorts of codes, fancy words which we like to use. But it exists, it's been there for a long time, and therefore we call it the original social media. Next. And because ham radio involves making contacts with each other over the medium, we also wishfully call it a contact sport. Next please. So, in the next 5-6 minutes, I'll run you through how ham radio has evolved over the past couple of years and how it has now reinvented itself with the advent of internet and mobile communication. So what you have on the screen is you have 2 happy faces on both sides. In the middle, you have the amateur radio frequency spectrum, which is basically air. Just for reminding everybody, I have said that the end goal remains communication. And on both sides, we have an antenna and a rig. A rig is basically an amateur radio, the physical radio. So one of the first things which happens is, next please. There are a number of options which are available to each amateur radio operator as to how he wants to use his rig. And we call these options, we give them a fancy name, we call them modes. So what started initially, we have what is called the CW mode or the continuous wave mode. Basically, it's a fancy name for Morse code. The beauty of Morse code is, come what may, however bad the propagation conditions are, Morse code will always go through, irrespective of how bad the propagation conditions are. The worst rig, the worst antenna, somebody who knows Morse with a power source, if he is able to fire it up, chances are he will be able to communicate with somebody across. Thereafter we have AM, amplitude modulation, which is still being used currently in the aviation industry. We also have single sideband, which is what we commonly use, which we call voice. Then of course we have FM, which is basically the smaller radios which we are using, and of course bigger radios as well. And finally, we had to add digital mode, because when computers came in, the possibilities increased manifold. This really changed the world of ham in a big way, and this is one of my favorite modes of operation. Next please. So currently we have about 3 types of satellites. We have the low Earth orbit and the medium Earth orbit satellites. The International Space Station is used extensively by hams in India and abroad to communicate across places. So basically when the space station comes overhead, one ham, he aims an antenna at the space station while it's moving, while he moves his hand, and he starts transmitting, and hopefully somebody else somewhere catches it and replies, and that counts as a contact, a QSO, and that gets logged in both the logbooks, and communications are taking place as far as I think 15,000 kilometers over this mode with a handy of this size. We're looking at something like this. Of course, the latest development in satellites is the geostationary Earth orbit satellite, that is the GEO. It's called the Qatari Oscar 100, QO 100. During your break, please go out and take a look. We have a setup of a QO 100 satellite laid out. You can listen to people talking over it, and possibly if Amitabu confirms, maybe we can have a QSO with somebody across also. This is something very fantastic. The satellite is located above Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, and it covers entire India, parts of southern Europe and Brazil, up to a little bit of Brazil, and it's really fascinating. It's a really beautiful way of communication. So once we decided that we managed to make use of the satellites, of course the hams were not happy, so they decided to go higher. Next please. So what comes up is called the Earth-Moon-Earth communication, or EME. So there are some hams in India who use this. What essentially happens is you use the moon like a repeater, and you bounce your signals of the moon back down to somebody, and you have a QSO in that manner. It calls for a lot of expensive, good sized antennas and a little bit of sophistication, but it is being done. Next. With the advent of the internet and the advent of the mobile, ham had to reinvent itself. And two very interesting things took place. Two very interesting developments took place. The first was remote rig operations. Now, it was possible to operate your radio while you were in a different location using a mobile and the internet. So you use the mobile, it's like Internet of Things. You use your mobile to switch on your radio set and start speaking, but you didn't have to be next to the radio set, which you normally do. So that gave a lot of freedom to hams now move around and operate. And the second thing that happened was the advent of the non-radio frequency modes for propagating ham. We call them the eco-link. Another mode is peanut. Now there's a lot of controversy about this. Is it exactly ham or not? The purists say this is not ham, it's a sham. But there are people who also use it a lot, and it's very popular. So we'll not go into the debate of ham versus sham, but it's very popular, so we'll leave it at that. The other thing that happened was the digital. You are now able to send digital signals across the radio frequencies using your computers. So that was the next evolution that took place. Next. So there are 2-3 approaches of what a ham operator does. You have one set of approaches which say that the most important thing about hams is home brewing. You must know electronics. If you don't know electronics, you should have learned a little bit of it, and you must make your own rig. If you don't make your own rig, at least your own antennas and you must be able to solder a little bit and put together a rig of some sorts. The pleasure for this group of people, homebrewers essentially, is in the pleasure of electronics. They make a rig, they make a contact. Remember, the end goal was communication. They are able to communicate, and the moment they have done their communication once or twice, the rig is working fine, they probably take it apart and start building something else. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is the one in blue. You have what we call the DXers. DX stands for distance station. So these hams don't do local contacts. They specialize in very, very far off stations, Finland, Norway, I'm talking from India, and places like that. You have what we call wallpaper hunters. So there are a number of awards which are available by various organizations. QRZ.com is the most common one. And say if you are able to work all these states of United States, you get an award called Work All States, WS. You get DXCC, distance station, 100 contacts if you make. This is called the DXCC award. And so there are n number of awards and people like to go for them, and they are known as the wallpaper hunters. We have rag chewers, really pure hands who like nothing more than just talking to each other. And I've heard recipes being exchanged on the air. I've heard number of things, weather being discussed, technology being discussed. They don't even maintain logs. The pleasure for these hands is just talking to other people across the frequency and similar-minded people and discussing various things. Then of course we have QSL characters. Every time you make a contact with somebody, the contact has to be followed up with something called a QSL card. So it's like a postcard. So earlier you used to have postcards. Nowadays they are scanned digital copies and they come to you by email. QSL collection is even now to some extent a very, very popular hobby, and some veteran hands have really thousands of QSL cards from all over the world. From exotic countries, and they really display it very well. It's like a museum piece. It's almost like stamp collection, but collection of stamps with the person you spoke to, something like that. What I've not mentioned out here is chasing birds. Chasing birds is the acronym or the slang for people who only do QSOs and satellites. So the satellite is a bird, and why you have to chase it is because the satellite moves. And so you have to keep pointing your antenna to it and getting it done. I'll digress here for 1 minute and take about 30 seconds to felicitate VU2YYE Oscar Sierra. Those, can you please stand up for me once? We have a legend amongst us, VU2YYE Oscar Sierra, and the reason, thank you sir, and the reason I asked him to get up is he completes 50 years of radio activity. And his first QSL card from Philippines is dated 1972 December, if I'm not mistaken. 73? September. November. Sorry?
Should stay away from him.
Yeah.
Years of rape.
He's a really radioactive guy in that sense of the word. So he is one of our mentors and somebody we really look up to, and he's come to us from Hyderabad. Next please. Yeah. Now, is Amitabh here? Atunga? Yeah, Atunga is there. So, I spoke about DXing. We have a lecture by Atunga shortly after this, where he covers the details of DXing. The word spota, parts on the air. So, we have three very, very active hands who have really worked a lot on this aspect. So that the adventure aspect of ham radio comes when you take your ham radio, go out of your house, go into a national park, or go onto a peak or a summit, or go on a beach, or go somewhere away from where you are staying, activate your radios and start making contact from there. So this series of activities is called Parks on the Air for national parks, Beaches on the Air, BETAAR, for people who are operating from the beaches, summits on the air for those who are operating from summits, and so on. The list is endless. We have three experts here. They're outside in the lab. They're setting up the station there. One is Amitabh, and Obroji. They have found this niche in India. They have activated it, and they have done a fabulous job, really commendable job of activating this aspect of hand radio. The next piece. Finally, we have the shortwave listener. Now, why I have added this? The shortwave listener today does not need a license. For a hand, we need a license. But the shortwave listening skill is a crucial ham radio skill. If you are not a good listener, you will never be a good ham. And therefore, most of our old legends like Okunoda, Joes and all, they all essentially started off being outstanding listeners. It's more than ham radio, it's a life skill. To be a good human being, first and foremost, you have to be a good listener. And thereafter, the two-way process of communication can take place. Next. What gives you pleasure? Is it electronics? Is it the technical part of the hobby? Is it the social part of the hobby? Is it the collection part of the hobby that you want QSL cards? You need to decide this. You need to identify what makes you what makes you happy, and then pursue that aspect of the hobby. It's a vast hobby, and there's lots to do in it. Next, please. So we have homebrew, make your own radios, as I mentioned. We have contesting. So radio sports is a niche subject, not very well exploited in India. So this is where within a certain time, within a 24-hour period, how many international contacts can you make? So short of, they really skip meals, they skip everything just to be on the radio 24 hours and make as many contacts as you can globally. RAG2, I've already mentioned, it is the complete antithesis of collection of QSL cards. All they want to do is chat over the radio and generally exchange their views. There's no collection, there's no competitive element in this. DXing, I already mentioned, QSL collection, and of course chasing birds, that's satellite work. Next. So, to put things into perspective, ham has tremendous scope in India. The antenna which you see on the left is an antenna of a person in Bangalore called VU2YYE, Lakshman. Lakshman is again one of the really top-notch hams. Extremely sophisticated equipment, completely invested in the hobby. Doing a satellite QSO, and this antenna which you see on the left are antennas which are computer controlled. So the moment the satellite comes up, the antenna locks onto the satellite and keeps tracking it. And on the right hand side, the guy on the left, the antenna on the left, is a 400 rupee antenna, doing exactly the same thing by hand, speaking probably to Lakshman himself. So the point which I am trying to bring about is there are two financial spectrums to this hobby. You can do the same thing with really less limited budget, and at the same time on the top end there's no end to it. Of course there's going to be a difference in the performance, but there's going to be no difference in the pleasure and the satisfaction that you get from it. Next. So with that I come to an end. I'll now hand the mic back to Shine. If there are any questions now, I can take them, or I can take them on little later in the panel discussion. So if there are any questions now, can somebody raise their hands? Right. So we'll do the questions later, and back to you, Shine.